The historic 2024 polls have come and gone, and now we take stock. We reflect on, amongst others, the critical role played by the media in telling the South African story. And the media's role consisted of making sure that the electorate was informed and that it had access to platforms to hold those in power accountable. So for an appraisal of the way in which the country's media executed its mandate, I'm joined by Thandi Smith, who is the head of programs at Media Monitoring Africa. Thandi, good morning to you. You and I stood outside the IEC HQ there at The Rock last night after we had stood down from our broadcast, just kind of taking a deep breath in. And I think a lot of newsrooms, not only in South Africa, but of course the foreign correspondents as well, who all converged to tell the South African story, will be taking a little bit of a moment to breathe, even though the story by no means is over. Let's just start with the most important objective or mandate of the work that we do, which is to make sure that we inform and that we educate the public. Share with us some of the early trends and observations as the Media Monitoring Africa you've made. And welcome to the program, by the way.
No, and thanks for having me. I think it's so important to take this time to just sort of sit and reflect and get ready for what's ahead of us. In terms of what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, I think it's important to start by saying, media have had an unbelievably difficult job in covering these elections. I think some of the challenges were unprecedented in the way that the elections were unfolding and the new players on the scene. So I think media and journalists really had to plan and had to figure out uncharted territory. And from our perspective, media have really done a fantastic job in covering these elections. We in a new era of disinformation, misinformation. So that makes the role of the media even ever so more important, because half the work that needs to be done is almost debunking some of the narratives that are out there, which are really insidious and really dangerous to our sort of information ecosystem. I think where the media have sort of fallen short is around representation and diversity in coverage. When we look at women's voices. That is the one critique that we've seen. The general trend has declined in terms of how much prominence women have received in coverage. But that's also not to say that it was to the fault of media specifically. We have a very male-dominated political space, and I think that was a challenge. But in terms of trying to reach citizens' voices, trying to unpack the really complicated elections process that we were all trying to grapple with, I think we can say that the media have done a great job, but I think that the tough work isn't over yet.
And we'll get to the second half in a manner of speaking in just a moment. And this is the composition, constitution of Parliament, the election, the election of a president and inauguration. So the election story in terms of beyond the ballot, and those scenarios are still going to play themselves out, and we'll talk about that in a moment. I want to go back to what you said at the beginning. Different challenges were experienced in the coverage of these elections. Some of them were unprecedented. The media was in uncharted territory. Just explain a little more with examples of what you mean by that.
Well, I think so. Aside from the actual sort of legal space of the amendments to the Electoral Act, the introduction of the regional ballot, the new parties that we've seen, the very strong new parties that we've seen that are now in Parliament, media have a role in terms of trying to provide equitable coverage to politicians and political parties. And that means that parties need to sort of get represented as they are in the political space. So the parties who have more representation, and obviously as the ruling party, the ANC, you would expect them to get a sort of bigger chunk of the coverage. When you have new political players, the media have to sit back and decide what's in the public interest to report on, and how they balance that equitable coverage of existing political parties. And so that is always going to get critiqued, because all political parties are going to want some kind of airspace and coverage of their campaigning, of their manifestos. So it actually takes a lot to decide. And with the number of political parties that we had contesting these elections, we only have a limited, number of hours in the day to get that coverage. And so it really is, and that also goes back to why the media are so very important during this time, because it really is the way that the media decide to cover certain political parties and how much airtime to give them plays a role in how the electorate, the public, plays a role in how informed they are around this. We saw MK Party, causing a lot of public noise, and not always very positive as well. And media had to balance how to cover what. With our sort of new digital landscape, the amount of information that people have access to is we haven't seen that before. But in South Africa, we have a very unique challenge where we have a percentage of people that are online, have access, engage with information on their devices, and we have a big majority of people who still rely on traditional models of media to access their information, TV, radio, sort of on the ground campaigning as well. And so in order to navigate all of that and reach all the audience that needs to be reached, media have had to be really innovative and try and find that balance.
Well, let's talk about the next steps in, again, as you say, there were a number of information challenges that, as the fourth estate as well, we had to accurately relay to, all of those who were interested, especially those who were taking part in the electoral process. And the beauty of moments like these, Thandi, is that it does provide an opportunity for that education on that granular and deeper level about how the law works together with the formation of important institutions in the country, what some of the legal challenges are likely to be. So it was a deeply educational process. And as you say, with the introduction of different ballots and so on, we had to get up to speed and ensure that we conveyed that information in a way that was intelligible and simple for everyone to understand and engage with. So what are the challenges you see in the lead up to the next big milestone, which is the constitution of our new parliament, the election of a president and the inauguration?
Well, what we have seen is that there are a number of political parties who are not happy with the results, who there have been narratives around elections rigging, the process that the IEC is, how the process unfolded, how the IEC managed that process. I understand that there are they're said to be legal challenges to the process, and so journalists who need to be reporting and engaged on this also need to understand, like you said, understand the law, understand the electoral processes, because I think one of the big issues is that given the sort of political uncertainty and this new kind of political era that we entering into, there's so many unknowns, and if we can just try and manage the levels of anxiety and tension and confusion, and if the media are able to kind of be at the forefront of that, that will enable, it will take away the power of those who are wanting to disinform and to push those narratives to cause further confusion. So the media really needs to be on top of it, so that it's not about countering narratives, but it's about providing that accurate information up front.
Thandi Smith, thank you very much for the observations that you and Media Monitoring Africa have made in the coverage of these elections. Appreciate your time and perspective.